What is it that allows a person to survive the truly unimaginable? Well, today, we're going to explore that very question by diving into the profound insights from Viktor Frankl's incredible work, Man's Search for Meaning. Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start with the big question Frankl was trying to answer. Then we'll trace the psychological journey of a prisoner, see how it was possible to find meaning in all that suffering, and finally, get to what Frankl called the last of the human freedoms. So, first things first, we have to understand the brutal reality of the camps to even begin to ask the question, how could anyone possibly survive this? This is the exact question Frankl wanted to tackle. You see, he wasn't focused on just retelling the big, well-known horrors. He was a psychiatrist, so he wanted to map out the internal experience, what was actually going on inside a person's mind day to day. And Frankl makes this really clear. His focus isn't on one single, awful event. It's about the psychological weight of constant, grinding suffering. It's the slow erosion of the human spirit by, 1,000 tiny cuts, day after day after day. So, when prisoners first arrived, their mind's first line of defense immediately kicked in. So many of them clung to this illusion that maybe things wouldn't be so bad, that they'd be spared at the last minute. Frankl actually gave this powerful psychological shield a name, the delusion of reprieve. And right after that came what Frankl called the finger game. It is just chilling to think about how this one tiny gesture held the absolute power of life and death. A single casual point of a finger decided everything. Point to the right, you work. Point to the left, you go to the crematorium. And with those horrifying words spoken to Frankl when he asked where his friend, who was sent to the left, had gone, that delusion of reprieve was just shattered. The smoke rising from a chimney nearby became the awful, undeniable truth. So once that reality crashes down on you, the mind has to scramble to find some way to cope. And this led to some very distinct psychological phases, really a desperate defense mechanism against a world that made no sense. Frankl saw three main phases: the initial shock of arrival, the deep apathy that set in during camp life, and then the challenges of liberation itself. For now, we're going to focus on those first two, because they show us how the mind tried to defend itself. In that first phase, the shock phase, you lose everything. I mean, your possessions, your identity, your family, it's all gone. Frankl said the worst moment was what he called the culminating point, the moment you had to consciously decide to just strike out your whole former life to survive the present. To survive the daily beatings, the injustice, the constant presence of death, the mind had to build a protective shell, and that shell was apathy. It wasn't about not having feelings. It was a necessary numbing of them. It was the only way to survive a reality that was just too much to feel. And you can really see the stark difference here. A new prisoner would look away in horror, but a veteran prisoner, they couldn't afford to. Emotions like disgust, horror, pity, they became luxuries. Luxuries you couldn't afford if you wanted to keep your sanity and your will to live. Okay, so we've talked about the how of psychological survival, apathy. But now we get to the really crucial question, why? Why did some people survive when so many others didn't? For Frankl, the answer was all about finding meaning. Frankl saw a pattern over and over again, one that the philosopher Nietzsche had just put perfectly. He who has a why to live for can bear almost any how. He saw with his own eyes that the prisoners who held on to a purpose, a reason to live, a loved one to see again, they had a much, much greater chance of making it. So where did people find this life-saving meaning? Frankl saw it coming from three main places: in their work, by doing something significant, in their love for another person, and, maybe most profoundly, in the courage they chose to show when facing suffering they simply couldn't escape. And this is just incredible. Even when he was physically at his lowest, surrounded by utter horror, Frankl discovered that his inner life, especially thinking about a loved one, was a refuge that no one could ever take away. He had this realization during a brutal, freezing march. A vivid mental picture of his wife became more real and brighter to him than the actual sun rising in the sky. And in that moment, he knew that love was the ultimate goal a person could aspire to. And this whole intense inner journey leads us to the book's most famous and powerful idea: the one thing that can never, ever be taken from a person, no matter what. This right here is the ultimate lesson from Frankl's entire experience. They could take away everything: his home, his family, even his name. But they could not take away that one last freedom: the freedom to choose his own attitude, to decide how he was going to face it all. Now, Frankl wasn't being naive. He knew very few prisoners could actually live up to this high standard. But that wasn't the point. The point was that if even one person could do it, it was proof that this fundamental human power exists inside all of us. The choice is always there. So Frankl's lesson, which was forged in the worst suffering imaginable, isn't just a story about the past. It's a timeless challenge for all of us. It asks us to look at our own lives, our own struggles, big and small, and ask ourselves, how will we use this ultimate freedom?
Today, we are doing a deep dive into a work that is, well, just monumental. It's Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning.
It's a book that's had such a profound impact. I mean, what has it sold? Over 12 million copies worldwide?
Something like that, yeah. And what's so striking is that it really stands as this incredible testament to the resilience of the human spirit.
It really does. And, it's remarkable because it's not just a self-help book. It's this terrifying combination of memoir and clinical therapy.
A very potent combination.
Extremely. Part 1 is just his raw, harrowing account as prisoner 119,104 in places like Auschwitz and Dachau.
And then Part 2 is the psychological theory he built from that experience, logotherapy. Critically, he validated it in, well, the most extreme human laboratory you could possibly imagine.
And that whole foundation, logotherapy, it's a direct challenge to the big psychological ideas of his time.
Right. We all know Freud was focused on the will to pleasure, and then Adler on the will to power.
And Frankl just pivots completely. He argues that the main motivational force for us, for humanity, is this inherent will to meaning, the logos.
So his personal mission really became about proving that famous line from Nietzsche.
He who has a why to live for can bear almost anyhow. And our mission in this deep dive is to see exactly how his own agonizing experiences prove that principle.
We'll do that by looking at the psychological phases of survival he observed, and then pull out the core, actionable ideas of his meaning-centered approach.
So let's start at the beginning, the unimaginable reality of the camps. Frankl arrives at Auschwitz. He was packed in with 1,500 other people.
80 people crammed into a single cattle car for days.
Yeah.
The atmosphere was just immediately dehumanizing.
And that dehumanization, it comes to a head almost instantly with the selection process. This moment where an SS officer just points a finger left or right.
They had no idea what it meant.
None at all. But the meaning was absolute. The gesture to the left, which was most of them, it meant immediate death. About 90% of his transport went straight to the gas chambers.
It's a moment that just forces the mind to break, in a way. Frankl talks about this thing he calls the delusion of reprieve.
Yes, it's a defense mechanism, isn't it? Where the mind just desperately clings to this hope that even at the very last second, something will save you.
He observed these reactions unfolding in 3 really distinct phases. The first one was just shock.
And this was characterized by a really strange, detached curiosity. He talks about prisoners standing naked in the freezing autumn air and just wondering, why don't I catch a cold?
It's the ultimate cognitive dissonance.
It is. And nothing, I think, symbolizes that loss of your former life more than that story about his scientific manuscript.
Oh, the one he smuggled in. His life's work.
His life's work. And he shows it to this long-term prisoner, hoping maybe he can save it. And the guy just dismisses it with the one word that was everywhere in the camp: shit.
And in that moment, his whole academic self, his whole past, it's just annihilated.
It forced him to psychologically, as he puts it, strike out his entire former life. And that shock, it quickly gives way to the second phase, apathy.
Which he describes as an emotional death.
A vital, necessary shield. You had to have it to protect yourself from the constant injustice, the beatings, the death all around you.
And when you reduce life to just bare survival, the mind, it regresses. He said the mental life became almost primitive.
Completely. It was dominated by one thing.
Food.
Just constant, detailed thoughts and discussions about food, recipes, what meals they'd eat, what they were dreaming about. That became their entire inner world.
It was a total psychological retreat. And this apathy was so deep, they even had this dark camp humor about it.
Right. The thing with the cigarettes, Frankl noticed that when a prisoner started smoking his own cigarettes,
Instead of trading them
for a crust of bread or some soup, you knew he'd given up the will to live. Those cigarettes were survival currency. To waste them on a fleeting pleasure, it meant you'd resigned yourself to death.
But this is where it gets so interesting. This is where his theory really starts to take shape. Because despite that physical and mental regression, Frankl saw that a prisoner's spiritual life could actually deepen.
Dramatically and, completely unexpectedly. The outside world was a total wreck, but the inner world, that could transcend everything.
He tells that incredible story about marching to the worksite, stumbling in the dark, and starting this silent, intimate conversation with the image of his wife.
And he says in that moment he was just transfixed by a truth, that love is the ultimate and the highest goal that human beings can aspire to.
The insight there is just.
Yeah.
It's so profound. He realized her physical presence didn't even matter anymore.
Exactly. The meaning came from contemplating her image, her being, not her body. Love transcends the physical. It's an internal act. And that spiritual freedom, that was the last thing they had any choice over.
And that escape into an inner world, it also showed up as this intense appreciation for moments of beauty.
Yes, flashes of light in the darkness. On the way to Dachau, in this brutal, cramped train car, they were all captivated by a sunset over the mountains.
And that other image he paints of the prisoners gathering on the muddy ground just to watch a sunset, and a man whispers, "How beautiful the world could be."
These weren't just nice moments, they were active choices. Choices to find meaning and transcendence in a world that was literally designed to destroy both.
And all these observations about who survived and who didn't, who kept that inner purpose, it led him to a really sobering conclusion about human nature.
A very sobering one. He said, ultimately, there are only two races of men in this world, the decent man and the indecent man.
And that line cuts through all groups.
All groups. It divides prisoners from each other, and you could even find a decent guard among the brutal SS. It's character, not your circumstances, that defines you.
And that distinction, that freedom to choose your own inner attitude, that's the bridge to his theory, isn't it?
Yeah. It is. If that spiritual freedom was the key to survival in the camp, how did he then formalize it into a therapy for the neuroses of modern comfortable life?
Which brings us to logotherapy in a nutshell.
Meaning-centered psychotherapy. It's all founded on the human will to meaning. And Frankl argued that when that will is frustrated, you get modern man's biggest problem, the existential vacuum.
It's far more common than people think. He called it a mass neurosis, and the numbers back him up. He cites a poll where 60% of American students said their main goal was finding a purpose and meaning in life.
And that vacuum exists, he argues, because we've lost this twofold security. We've lost the animal instincts that used to just guide us, which forces us into this state of constant, exhausting choice.
And we've also lost the traditions and the values that used to tell us what we ought to do.
Exactly. So without instincts or traditions to guide you, you feel lost. And people tend to fall back on two things.
What are they?
The first is conformism. You just do what everyone else is doing. The second is totalitarianism. You do what others tell you to do. You surrender your choice.
Both are ways of just avoiding the responsibility of finding your own unique meaning.
And that sounds like the root of so much modern boredom, right? That emptiness that hits you when the week is over and the distractions stop.
He called that the Sunday neurosis.
Yes. Anxiety and despair when the work week ends and that inner void just becomes palpable, and it shows up as depression, aggression, and especially as addiction. The no future generation just trying to fill that gap.
It's this constant search for attentionless state, for homeostasis, which so much of psychology holds up as the goal. But Frankl just flips that completely on its head.
He does. Because if meaning requires struggle, then comfort might actually be the enemy.
So he introduces this concept of noodynamics.
Right. To counter that idea of homeostasis, he insisted that mental health doesn't come from a tensionless state. It requires the necessary tension between what you are now and what you feel you ought to become.
The striving itself is the healthy action.
It is. Think about the camp again. The people who survived often had a future task pulling them forward, a book to write, a loved one to see again.
A why.
A why. Frankl uses this analogy of an architect. If you want to strengthen a crumbling arch, you don't take weight off it, you increase the load.
The responsibility, the load, is what gives it strength.
Precisely. So the therapist's job isn't to make you comfortable, it's to reorient you towards a meaning that you need to fulfill.
Okay, so that's the theory. But for you, the listener, looking for something practical, how does Frankl say we actually find this meaning?
Well, he's very clear that meaning isn't invented, it's discovered. And he gives three main ways to do that. The first one is the most obvious: creating a work or doing a deed.
So achievement, accomplishment, building something.
Exactly. The second path is a bit deeper: experiencing something or encountering someone.
Like experiencing beauty in nature or art. Like the sunset in the camp.
Yes, or encountering another person in their total uniqueness, which for Frankl is the definition of love.
And this is where his view of love is so different from, say, the Freudian one. It's not just a side effect of primal drives.
Not at all. For Frankl, love is seeing another person's full potential, their logos, their unique essence. Sex is just a vehicle for expressing that. The real goal is to recognize and help bring out the highest potential in another person.
And then there's the third way, the most challenging one, and the one forged in Auschwitz.
The attitude we choose toward unavoidable suffering. This is the core validation of his whole theory. Suffering itself is meaningless, he says. It's just an affliction.
But we give it meaning by how we respond.
By the dignity and resolve we bring to it. And that transforms a tragedy into a human achievement.
You mentioned that anecdote of the elderly doctor who was grieving his wife. That reframing is just so powerful.
It is. Frankl just asked him, what if you had died first? And the man realized he had spared her the unimaginable pain of mourning him.
So his suffering wasn't just a loss anymore.
It became a sacrifice, a price he paid to save his beloved from a greater sorrow. And in that, he found meaning in an unchangeable tragedy.
But Frankl was very clear. This only applies to suffering you cannot avoid.
Exactly. If you can change it, the meaningful thing to do is eliminate the cause. To endure suffering you don't have to is masochistic, not heroic.
So it all points back to that one final foundational freedom, the power to choose, even when everything else is gone.
That is the ultimate takeaway. Everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way.
And that idea of self-determination, it underpins the whole concept of responsibility in logotherapy.
Which led him to create this kind of categorical imperative for being responsible. He said, live as if you were living already for the second time, and as if you had acted the first time as wrongly as you are about to act now.
That forces you to be radically accountable for this moment. It's your second chance.
It's a brilliant mental exercise, and it's why he made that famous suggestion of complementing the Statue of Liberty on the East Coast with the Statue of Responsibility on the West Coast.
Because freedom without responsibility is just aimless.
It's chaos. And this emphasis on responsibility, it even changes how we should look at time, especially old age. He says we overlook the full granaries of the past.
We tend to just focus on what's been lost or the limits of the future.
Whereas Frankl says nothing is truly lost in the past. Everything you've done, everything you've loved, everything you've endured is irrevocably stored.
So old age shouldn't be pitied.
It should be, in a way, envied. The young just have possibilities. The old have realities. They have deeds done, loves loved, and sufferings bravely suffered. Those are permanent assets.
Which brings this whole discussion back to the idea of unconditional human value. Because if your value is stored in the past, it can't just be about your current usefulness.
Exactly. Frankl was adamant that an individual's dignity and value are unconditional. They don't depend on your social status, your health, or your ability to contribute right now.
And this takes the theory full circle, right back to the horrors he witnessed, the euthanasia programs.
He argued that confusing dignity with usefulness is incredibly dangerous. Once you believe a person's value is only in what they can do for society now, you open the door to rationalizing the disregard or even the killing of those deemed unproductive.
So his final stand is that life's meaning and your value as an individual are absolute and unconditional.
They have to be.
This deep dive into Frankl's work, it really shows us that the power of life isn't about what we expect from it. It's about realizing what life expects from us.
By choosing our attitude, we can transform that tragic triad of human life, pain, guilt, and death into opportunities for real achievement.
And that profound shift in perspective, born from the absolute worst of human suffering, it leaves a powerful imperative for every single one of you listening today.
Frankl, having seen the worst that man is capable of, he left us with a challenge. He said, since Auschwitz, we know what man is capable of, and since Hiroshima, we know what is at stake. And the final task, the ultimate responsibility for you now, is to consider his personal instruction. The world is in a bad state, but everything will become still worse unless each of us does his best.